Don't believe the church and state and everything they tell you.
Shalom, this is Yoshua Oliver coming to you on the 5th of June 2020 on Yud Gimel 7 Erev Shabbos. And police are such bullies. Isn't it amazing how when people were gathering in parks or in protests against a lockdown, then the police were called in. When people were gathering in private prayer groups, then the police were called in to break it up, break up the protest, break up the prayer. Even when they gathered to pray in separate cars, the police came in to break them up in some places. They were just so zealous about enforcing the law, the edicts of the governors. Why? Because it was needed in order to prevent people from being in harm's way. These prayer gatherings, these protests were putting people in harm's way according to the highly debatable claims of the public health officials. But those orders, those edicts, which were themselves highly questionable in their legality, they violate the Constitution, those edicts had to be enforced with police force because it's against the law. But when violent criminals are roaming the streets in masks, which is now kosher to wear a scary looking mask and then suddenly commit a crime, you're ready, dressed for the part, because now that's expected. So when there is violent crime throughout the streets, then the police, suddenly they're not so tough. Suddenly they're not so zealous about people being in harm's way. Suddenly they turn into little kittens, little bunnies. It's because citizens who care about their freedoms and rights or want to pray, well, they're easy targets. But citizens who want to commit crimes, which is really what the police exist for, not to break up prayer gatherings or to break up peaceful protests. That's not the purpose of the police. When it comes to the police doing their actual job, then they are looking the other way. They're not doing what they should be doing. And so that's one level of looking at the situation. But I don't really believe that. I don't really believe that it's just that the police are afraid or that the police are weak. There's more to it. There are many tough policemen. There are many policemen, I would imagine, with morals, with a sense that they should take action against such a thing. So really, the only logical explanation for the relative inaction of the police in response to the riots in many places is that they were essentially given a stand-down order. They were told by higher-ups not to respond, to allow the mayhem to continue. So we need to understand that everything we see on the news is a lie. Don't believe the stories you hear on the news. The entire event in which George Floyd was supposedly killed, don't believe a single thing that the news is telling you about it. I don't claim to know exactly what happened. But what I do know that it's very suspicious. The very fact that this event is being used to as a pretext for protests and riots that suddenly um, were came out all over the country. So those riots had to be planned well in advance. Riots on that scale, protests on that scale, could not have been arranged so soon, so quickly. These were planned events, and therefore that alone proves that the George Floyd event was a staged event. But you can get into the details of the George Floyd event, how the video from one angle doesn't show the person taking the video supposedly from a different angle. The main video that everyone saw, that person taking that video does not exist in the more recent video that came out. All kinds of questions about the background of George Floyd, his connection to the guy who supposedly arrested him, that they had a long-standing personal connection, that George Floyd himself was a professional actor, and so on and so forth. Look into it. It's suspicious. That much should be enough. The main thing is not the details. People are asking me, do I think that George Floyd is still alive? Perhaps some are saying that he died already 3 years ago. I don't know the details. It's enough to know that we are being deceived. That this whole story is very suspicious. It doesn't add up. And it certainly doesn't add up that there would be protests all of a sudden so quickly throughout the country, which I believe are unprecedented on this scale. That doesn't add up. So if you add it all together, you see that the main culprit that must be suspected is the deep state. It's the government and nefarious agencies and factions, forces within the government. They are behind this. This is not just the left. People are blaming the leftists. Yes, there are leftists involved. I imagine many people organizing the riots genuinely identify as leftists, but they themselves are tools. They're pawns of a far more nefarious agenda, whose purpose is power, control, and breaking down society even further from what COVID accomplished. So this whole event, the George Floyd shooting, not shooting, but his murder, supposedly, the riots, the response of the police, the pathetic response of the police, this is all part of a grand mind control operation, an extension of the COVID mind control operation. It's a psyop, psychological warfare, for the sake of creating a response of outrage, of fear, of tension, of confusion, of chaos, of a desperate call, in this case, a call for the government to step in and bring law and order to the situation. And the police have proven themselves impotent, so therefore we have to call in a National Guard. That's exactly what the goal is. The people themselves should demand an expansion of the police state. That's the goal. through a fake staged event. Just like the people who were demanding a shutdown, playing right into the hands of the deep state. They were saying, why didn't you shut down sooner? Shut down the state, shut down the state. Because they fell for the propaganda. So the purpose of the mind control operation, that there's this pandemic, it's killing so many people and we have to take action right now. And then the government doesn't take action, but then the people demand it, and then the government can say, oh, the people demanded it. So it has more legitimacy. That is the best way to manipulate people. When they themselves demand to be enslaved. The key to overcoming this oppression is therefore sharing the knowledge, sharing the awareness that this is all a trick. A sophisticated mind control operation by very nefarious Nazi-like secret societies. You know what? The details don't matter so much as to who exactly is behind it. What matters is that the official story we're being told is false. COVID is not what we were told it is. It certainly didn't cause the mass deaths that were predicted, and people are still in denial. They're still expecting mass deaths to happen. It's kind of funny. It's just everyone is pointing it out that there are these riots where all the people dropping dead who are rioting, and but you know, I highly doubt that all the COVID-19 believers will be shaken in their faith, their blind faith in the COVID-19 death cult religion through seeing the riots and all the people who are not observing social distancing when they riot. I mean, they're wearing masks, so I guess that must explain why they're not all dropping like flies, because they're wearing masks. Yeah, they're for sure wearing masks, I can tell you that. I mean, actually, some people are not. If you look in these videos, they're just incredible. They've got all these people running around looting the stores, even without a mask. Just amazing. I mean, they've been caught on camera. They're just so oblivious to the reality of what it is they're doing. They're giving themselves a criminal record. It's just incredible. But yeah, apparently the majority are wearing masks, and yeah, so maybe that explains the fact that they're not all dying or getting very sick from COVID. How can people not see that they are being deceived? That is the question. When you see just how obvious the deception is, then it's just so you can't relate to these people who seriously believe what they see on the news. I mean, the news is I heard a television. It tells you a vision. It doesn't tell you reality. It tells you a fantasy, or tell lie vision. It tells you a lie. It shows you a lie. That's all. It's all about lies. It's all pure propaganda. What you see on television, it's always a distraction or an outright lie. So many stories that went against the official narrative, went against the powers that be. We never heard about them. For example, the alliance between Saudi Arabia and the United States and Israel for that matter. Why isn't that discussed? Why don't we hear? Why do we barely hear anyone pointing out? How is it that all the alleged attackers, hijackers on 9/11 were Saudis, and then we went and attacked Afghanistan and then Iraq? Wouldn't we have attacked? Shouldn't we have attacked Saudi Arabia? No, no one talks about that. Um, what about all the ties between people in government and the defense contractors, like um, um, you know, Boeing and so on? What about that? No, that's not a story. Things are still, we only hear the stories that we're allowed to hear. It's all controlled. And the government is very happy for people to be watching football and to be watching movies, because then they're distracted from the government corruption. Um, and yes, the National Guard is one step in the agenda. That is one stage of ramping up the government control. But ultimately, apparently, the goal is to bring in the military. And that would be really disastrous, because the purpose of the military is to be used against an enemy force from a foreign country, not to keep law and order within your own country. That's why we have the police. So that definitely would be far greater, far more severe tyranny than we already have. And the military is trained for war, not for peacekeeping. And really, a lot can go wrong when you put into power people who are trained to kill an enemy, trained to view the people they're dealing with as the enemy. So criminals within your own country, they're not the enemy in the same way that the military treats an enemy in wartime. So this is all looking very, very concerning. This is the direction things are going, and we have to expect things to get worse. I know that sounds really pessimistic and cynical, but that's just the direction things are going. What can we do? All I can think of is spread this awareness. When people know they're being deceived, then they're protected from further deception, from further manipulation. Don't wear the masks. Don't submit to temperature checks. Certainly don't submit to any COVID testing. Do your utmost to avoid situations in which you might be subjected to any of that. The goal is mass mind control. So what's, in this case, with regard to the riots, it's mass mind control through creating the perception of the sparking of a race war. And every lie has to be believable for it to be successful in being used as a tool to control people. So a race war is believable because the media, and especially the leftist liberal media and politicians, And academics and intellectuals have been pushing this narrative that there's incredible levels of racism here in America in this day and age. And since people have this impression, which I don't think is true, so therefore the staged event of a race war can be believed. Oh, that racism that we knew was just brewing under the surface all this time and we kept talking about, now it's coming out, you see, now it's coming out. The whole success of the uh, mind control is when the lie is plausible. And so we should view this as a tremendous injustice. It's an injustice because it's in a way a blood libel. It's a blood libel on two levels. It's an incredible false accusation. So, number one, the claim that George Floyd was killed by a white guy. So that just shows all this systemic, deep-rooted racism and hatred that leads to murder by white guys, as if somebody else who had a similar skin color to the alleged perpetrator had anything to do with it and any responsibility for it. That's in itself racist, of course, but that's the narrative that is essentially a blood libel against all people of a similar skin color. If you say there's such a thing as a white race, which is, you know, that's a debatable point, which I won't get into. But it's definitely a blood libel against people of that appearance. Likewise, the riots themselves, staged by agent provocateurs of the deep state, they constitute a blood libel against the black community. Black Lives Matter, it gives an incredibly bad impression of the black community. And I don't think all black people are like that. They're not all Marxists who hate so-called white people. I don't think so. I mean, that hasn't been my experience with my black neighbors. So, and in general, I don't get that impression. I think this is a very nefarious element which is trying to stoke these tensions and hatreds for the sake of gaining power. It's an age-old trick of divide and conquer. United we stand, divided we fall. The powers that be know that one of the key methods of expanding their power is creating conflict among the different groups that make up the population. They pit them against one another, and then they come in to save the day, to keep the order by expanding the power of the government and depriving the people of their rights and freedoms in one way or another. And then once they've taken away one of your rights and freedoms for the sake of saving you from some emergency situation, as Ron Paul says, they do not give that right and freedom back. They keep it for themselves. I was telling a friend of mine from Australia, I'm originally from Australia, that I don't view racism as a massive problem here in the United States where I live. I haven't observed that, and I believe that's this narrative that there is this widespread systemic racism leading to violence and murder all over and causing such terrible discrimination. I don't view that. I don't see that. Um, I'm sure it happens here and there, but to say that it's anywhere near the scale that we're being told by the leftist media, I don't think that's the case. I think it's wrong to mistreat anyone, and I don't know, treat someone poorly just because of their skin color. It's wrong to treat anyone poorly. Full stop. Um, just just respect everyone. That's it. You don't even need to say respect everyone for because of their skin color. Just respect everyone. Every human being was created in God's image, so therefore he or she should be respected for that. That's it. Um, in general, if we're talking about violence and murder, the main people responsible for uh, violence against members of the black community and murder of members of the black community is fellow members of the black community. It's black on black violence and black on black murder, and you won't hear about that, or you'll barely hear about that in the mainstream media. So again, that just shows how the mainstream media is all about creating division. They can't create division through telling us the truth about what is the primary um, cause of uh, violence against blacks and murder of blacks. They won't tell us that because that doesn't create conflict between groups. So the powers that be, they don't have an agenda in promoting that. That doesn't create conflict. That promotes, hopefully, that awareness should promote the black community to make its own housekeeping. It's not really my direct concern, and I wish them well. But that doesn't help the elites. If black people get their act together, it doesn't help the elites. They want black people to be weak, to be dependent, to be constantly blaming whites, to feel victim mentality, to feel persecuted, and I think that's a real disservice to the black community. If you really supported the black community, you would not want to promote such a narrative. And this has been the position of Candace Owens. Everyone's sharing her video. I listened to the whole thing. It was great. And this is what she said, that the black community has a history of shifting the blame to whites, so-called white, European, instead of taking responsibility for their own problems. Fatherlessness, crime, and so on. And you look at all these videos of the looting, and they're just completely shocking. You see all these kids joining in and just running and grabbing stuff. And I mean, these kids are pawns. The cause of this looting is, in my opinion, it's the deep state, the agent provocateurs of the deep state, and then the black kids are falling right into the trap of looting. The deep state wants the looting because that increases the hatred of blacks. That creates it and causes a massive increase in it. That's exactly the plan. They want to create racial tension because they want to create racial conflict and a race war. You have to wonder where all the parents of these looters are. But you know what? If the government wanted to set up, you know, kids of European descent, to set them up, they would be able to do that. They have plenty of tools up their sleeve with which they can manipulate everyone from every community. All these people are being manipulated. They're choosing to loot the stores, and that's really pathetic. And obviously, it's criminal and so on. But um, um, we're going to see deeper than that. Um, now, we can't just focus on the externality of what is happening. I mean, yes, these kids are clearly lacking in morals and education, but it's a setup. We're being played. COVID was an inside job to expand government power, and this is an inside job. George Floyd and these riots are an inside job to expand government power. Um, how does that work? How does it expand government power? On one level, it's an assault on the middle class. So the stores are boarded up, so that further harms or even destroys these middle class businesses that had hoped to reopen um, after the you know reopening was allowed. In some states, it's already uh, reopening has already begun. In other places, it's about to begin. Either way, many of these stores are now devastated, long term, perhaps um, irreparably, by these riots. So it's a further attack on the middle class after the suffering they already uh, bore during the lockdown. And number two, on a broader level, the purpose is to instill, in addition to what I said, instilling hate within the people, to instill fear within the people. So if you walk down central, what was once a bustling business center, and you see the windows boarded up, well, that makes you afraid. You know, the world you knew is now that you knew as being a good, safe neighborhood. That's now like that other neighborhood down there, which is deserted because all the houses were condemned. That's the feeling you now have when you walk through the center of your city. It's frightening. It's terrifying. So that's exactly the goal, to make you afraid, to make you terrified. So then you need to know not to fall for it. Don't allow yourself to become fearful because of these events that are happening. At least not fearful of what they're telling you to be afraid of. Be afraid of the deception. I mean, don't be afraid of anything except for God. But if there's something to be concerned about, the main cause for concern, for rational fear, is the deception. It's the useful idiots who zealously enforce whatever the government tells them to. They're just yes men to the government. Government says lockdown, lockdown. Government says masks, yeah, masks. Government says temperature checks, absolutely. Government says take a test, a PCR faulty test. Absolutely, we'll take your test. We won't question its validity. The government says vaccines, that's what's coming up. Absolutely, these same people will take the vaccine. They will completely ignore all the critics. And not only that, they will require it for other people who would not want to take the vaccine. You will not be able to get into public places without proof that you've taken the vaccine. This is all coming, and it's these uh, useful idiots who buy the official narrative and still accept government authority that we should truly be concerned about. I'm trying not to say fearful of. Um, yeah, COVID was not a pandemic. COVID was a fake event, a staged event. George Floyd is also a staged event. This is all trauma-based mind control. The idea is to create images in our minds, images of chaos in this case. It's the exact continuation, the exact parallel to those images we saw of in the news, which were all, I believe, they were all staged, or many of them were staged. Of the hospitals are war zones. They're so packed with people. There's not enough hospital beds, and people are being turned away, and people are dying because they can't get a hospital bed, and it's just crazy, and people dying of it's a war zone, war zone, war zone. Death, death, death. And the virus is deadly. People are dead. So many deaths. The death toll is rising. It's going to be millions of deaths. That was all trauma-based mind control. You traumatize someone, and that way you control them. After that, they won't think rationally. They probably weren't thinking that much before, but certainly after they've themselves undergone that experience, they will be reacting emotionally because they've been trained to respond obediently through the experience of suffering trauma. That's the meaning of trauma-based mind control. So whatever happens next, it's only getting started. The chaos, the mayhem that the deep state, the cabal, is inflicting on the world. So whatever happens next, remember one thing: don't trust anything in the news. Be extremely suspicious, and always suspect, first and foremost, the government, the deep state, is an act of deception. I'm not saying everything is necessarily deception. I mean, don't just not even investigate it. Maybe it could possibly be that some events are actually happen organically on their own. They're not staged. Yes, it's possible. I'm not ruling it out. What I'm saying is that when we have a lot of circumstantial evidence for events being orchestrated, then we should keep our eye out for whenever future events takes place, that this too was orchestrated. I'm not saying it will be. I think many will be, but I'm not saying any given future event necessarily is orchestrated. But I'm saying that we should definitely treat that as a very reasonable possibility. Whenever we examine an event, we should not only look to the mainstream media, we should look to the alternative media and the various theories. And there have been various theories about George Floyd, and I posted one of them, and people attacking me and saying, oh, it makes no sense because of this reason, that reason, it doesn't add up. Fine. But you know what? The discussion is legitimate. Let's discuss it. Let's compare the pictures of George Floyd's attacker with some other guy. Let's talk about it. We should be willing to discuss it. Oh, it sounds crazy. Yeah, it sounds crazy. No, it doesn't sound crazy at all. What really sounds crazy is that there are people who still think that the government is trustworthy, and the government is trustworthy in matters of health, and who still think that the media is trustworthy to tell you the truth. That is what is really insane. Those people are the ones lacking critical thinking skills. If someone wants to compare the picture of George Floyd's attacker with someone else and say that it's not really this guy, it's that guy, let's talk about it. Let's break down that taboo against open discussion of conspiracy theories. Could be. Why? I'm not ruling it out. I don't know. To me, it doesn't matter so much. What matters is that I have enough proof that this whole event is very suspicious, um, and that points to this being a staged event, and that's the main thing. The details don't matter so much. Just as when it comes to 9/11, there are certain truthers. A truther is someone who believes that 9/11 was an inside job. There are very intense debates, internal debates among truthers about various issues. And to me, those debates are interesting, but they are ultimately a distraction from spreading the message that 9/11 was an inside job. And there's the vast majority of the facts these activists agree on. So the main thing is to get out the message about which everyone agrees, not to harp on the 1% of material about which there are disagreements. So, guys, we should really eat good news. We need a miracle. We need a miracle. Stay safe. Stay safe from mind control. Don't stay safe from COVID. Is no more severe than the yearly flu. If anything, it's less severe. I mean, you should stay safe from it, I guess, but don't think that that is a serious threat. What's really a threat is mind control. Even people who are aware of the existence of mind control are still susceptible to it because they're able to view it as happening in one context but not in another context. So, for example, there are many people who could believe that mind control could be used to justify a war, as in 9/11, but when it comes to matters of health, they don't process that too could be could involve mind control, could involve mass deception. That's something that they didn't really come to accept yet. And so, yeah, even those who are aware of the existence of mind control operations, of the government using the media, the mockingbird media, for control, for manipulation of the masses, even such a person is susceptible to that same mind control when it's on a much larger scale than he could imagine. So many people can't imagine a conspiracy that involves almost all the world's governments. That's what we're looking at today with COVID. So therefore they don't notice the extent, or at least earlier on. Now it's more obvious, but earlier on they didn't process. They said, no, this must be a real event because all these world governments are responding this way. No, the world governments could be coordinating. That's just not a kind of conspiracy a level of conspiracy that you're familiar with. So therefore, you're more susceptible to it. No, but I say that no, you should know that this too is possible, and we have organizations such as the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and so on, which exist to bring governments to work together. We had the Agenda 201 event in last November, which everybody was talking about, how that was clearly a precursor to coronavirus, because at that event where they simulated a pandemic, they called it coronavirus. Well, what did that event involve? It involved um, world leaders from all over the world who came, or representatives of different countries who came and participated. So, you know, governments throughout the world can coordinate their activities. Um, yeah, so stay safe from mind control, stay safe from mobs, from rioters, and God should protect us, and we need a miracle. God should bring a miracle. God can do anything, so He can definitely bring a miracle. May He do so, and we should be blessed with the coming of Mashiach, of the righteous Messiah, immediately. We really need Him.